Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the Property Design and Development Podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex. I'm Robert Bean, your co-host, unofficial mediator, and here with my colleague, official agitator, heavy emphasis on agitator, friend, and Yoda of most everything to do with buildings, Mr. Adam Muggleton. Say hello, Sir Yoda.
Hello there. So, interesting one today. I have this Confucian respect for teachers, and we have someone who pretty much sits at the top of that pile today. So this should be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and one of the tags in her bio, I absolutely love this. A mechanical engineer teaching in the School of Architecture. So right there, ding, 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 ding. More cowbell, please. That's one of the reasons why UC Berkeley, where she's from, has been so influential in the world of research and design and buildings. Her doctorate degree in mechanical engineering studies in buildings and human factors has in part led her to become an associate director of the Center for the Built Environment. And we're going to talk about that because it's an incredibly important collaboration of academia and industry. She just released a book, co-authored a book called Experiential Design Schemas. I hope I pronounced that short word right. And what's interesting about that book, and I'm just going to read one of the taglines, which represents a fundamental shift in thinking from uniform space-based conditioning to a more localized people-based approach, which we love, and we'll talk about that. So yeah, welcome to the show, Gail Brigger. Professor.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Woman of the world. Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. You know, Gail, with a lot of our guests, I don't actually remember when I first came across your name, but where I think it actually happened. Do you remember Professor David Shetzley from Arizona State University?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, right. I love that man. And I don't know, David, if you ever listen, I don't know if he's still alive, but David, if you're alive and listening from wherever, he just influenced my view of architecture and design like no other. And anyways, so I think that's actually where I first came across your name, which would have been probably the late 80s, early 90s.
That could be. You're dating us.
Yeah, and but since that time, like he was doing work at in California. What was it? The Vital Signs Project?
Yes, Vital Signs. I did that with Chris Benton.
Yeah, and so that's going back a long, long ways. But anyway, since that time, you and a lot of your colleagues around the world have like really carved out a swath of knowledge that has influenced the world of property development, architecture, mechanical engineering all over the world. Your co-author, Mark Decay, and you dedicated your book, and I'm going to read this to the student and all of us. Yeah. And then when I first read that, like it reminded me, and I don't remember Confucius or somebody said, you know, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And so there you are, right? There you are, here you are, and you're just doing amazing work. So in a Cole's Notes way, tell us your story. How'd you get here?
Well, it certainly wasn't a grand plan. I would say it was more of a path of serendipity, that it was probably a confluence of several things without initially knowing where they might lead. So I can think of 3 or 4 things that came together. One is really strong environmental values. So I knew I wanted to do something that made a difference in that regard, but I really didn't know what. I had a very strong affinity for math and science. I loved it. I wanted to apply it in practical ways. So engineering seemed like a good path. I knew I enjoyed that. I liked all my classes. I did well. Still didn't know what I wanted to do with engineering until I started working at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab as a graduate student. And it was really there that I discovered that this field of building science research, and it was aimed at energy efficiency and climate responsive design and indoor environmental quality and so many things that made sense to me, So buildings ended up becoming a way for me to connect my interests in nature and research and engineering. And finally, I had a chance to teach as a student, and I loved it. And I wanted to be an educator. And I have to say, though, you guys, while I always really liked the knowledge base of engineering, it wasn't a very inspiring educational environment for me in terms of pedagogy. So I was very fortunate to meet Ed Ahrens, my mentor, colleague, dear friend. And it was through Ed that I really discovered that building science could be a part of architecture. And that's where the engineering and the architecture could blend. And I found that both as a discipline and an academic environment, it was just a very innovative intersection, and it blended everything I was looking for. And then where under his leadership, we developed the Center for the Built Environment and then connect academia to industry. Wow, it just had everything. And I feel so lucky to be where I am.
Actually, so Ed, friend of the pod, Ahrens, he's been on way back. And you just hit on something for me that's really important. The fact that linking engineering and architecture is considered unusual and novel drives me bonkers. Right? The facade, the architecture, the facade, I would argue, is the most important building system there. It affects personality, look, energy consumption, indoor environmental quality. It affects all them things, and no one pays it a blind bit of attention, really, other than does it look pretty. And that drives me bonkers. Again, I get driven bonkers a lot, which is why I look like this. But it's interesting to hear you say that. I mean, I still am confused why there's not more dedicated engineering degree programs that mush that together. I understand Penn State is one of them, but it's not the norm. It's the exception. Is that true?
I think it's more of a European thing. Right. That I think the engineering departments in the United States, this was frustrating. If I hadn't worked at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, there was nothing really going on about buildings in Department of Engineering when I was a student. So it was really through LBNL that I was able to discover that intersection. So programs in architectural engineering, I think, are much more common in Europe than they are in the United States.
Agreed. Yeah. Why do you think that is? I mean, it's certainly a very I've worked in America on a few projects. It's a very siloed approach there. My conclusion, not knowing anything, is that it was more about liability and the tend to litigation that kept it that way. Why do you think there is that separation? I have no idea, and I don't think it's a healthy thing. I think that maybe we're more comfortable with more conventional paths. I'm going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a fireman, an engineer, an architect, that there's a title that goes with a conventional point A to B path. And what I'm finding is that students inherently start with interdisciplinary interests, and then they get pushed into these singular paths, which don't always fit right. And I think not just architecture and engineering, but in many disciplines, I think there's value in encouraging interdisciplinary perspectives.
I totally agree. Adam, if you think about all the guests that we've had on over the last 5 years, I would say close to 95% of them were integrated thinkers, and they're all leaders. Yes. So if our leadership represents integrated thought patterns, what the hell's happening to industry? And, the opposite of integration is segregation. And segregation, I don't know where segregation works. In any system, where does segregation work? It doesn't work in social systems. It doesn't work in healthcare. It doesn't work in politics. There's no place for segregation where, in my mind, that it works. Maybe somebody else can come up with an area where it does, but
well, you think about it, right? So I'm a big fan of systems thinking and analysis, and segregation is the antithesis of that, right? A building is a system of systems. So segregation is almost like the anti-building approach.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry for you Americans out there.
And you see it too in buildings. And Gail, I mean, one of the things that you get that the Center for the Built Environment is well known for is its work with data from post-occupancy evaluations. And, the data that comes out and the conclusions from that in terms of the failure rate or inability to comply with even basic standards.
Yeah,
That's all a result of segregated design. Because when you look at buildings that do deliver on their promises, like in your book, I was flipping through parts of your book online and like there's some amazing architecture. But that took that sort of interdisciplinary study, and not just in terms of architecture and engineering, but social systems and healthcare systems and everything. And
I think it has to start. It has to start with how we're communicating to our students, bringing it back. Because if we train students to be single-minded in their thinking and in their skill sets, then that's what feeds the profession. And so I think we need to begin early by teaching students to value their interdisciplinary values and interests and to pursue them. And my sense is that when they're younger, it's more of a challenge if they're not following the straight point A to B. But in the long run, they will be the leaders, as you're finding with people in your podcast. And so the struggle starts early on. And if they solve that struggle by just pushing away all of their side interests and focusing on only one, then they become siloed. So I think young people need to be supported during that challenging time when they're trying to figure out how to put all of their different interests together and to be taught to value all of them. It's okay. And then in the end, I do think they're more sophisticated leaders.
So embrace the chaos in your mind.
Embrace the chaos. I love that phrase.
Correct. Because that happens to kids and even adults, where you just there's so much going on and interests and things and conflict, and you want to create silos for it, but maybe it's just a matter of just maybe setting aside that experience in your mind and just say, okay, well, that will have utility. It's not useful right now because it's causing me grief, right? But there may be a place in the future where that experience will have value, and maybe teaching kids that would be useful. I don't know.
So is this? Let's talk about the essential to built environment then, because you're a kid. You go, I want to be an engineer, right? You don't know what that means. It just sounds cool, and someone who's probably doing okay with that, right? So you go in. It's not the sort of degree you can fake. You have to work at it. You're not spending all your time in the student bar. Then you come out, and let's face it, you're still pretty useless at that point, right? Says the guy who used to employ graduates. I mean, you're probably good with maths, some basic fundamentals, but if you're going to move into the workspace of building design, that's an applied approach, right? So there is this gap between graduate, it's like a baby deer who can barely walk, and someone who can get in front of a client and not destroy themselves. Is what that gap needs to be filled. Now, in the past, that was filled by a form of apprenticeship, right? Is this something the CBE covers? Is that the envisaged gap for that?
Well, I think there's two ways of approaching that gap. One is I call them T-shaped people, right? Where we're trying to train people who have depth and specialization, but they also have breadth. Right? They can talk to people from different backgrounds. They can talk about different subjects. So that's one piece. And then there's also the piece of the bridge between academia and industry. But in terms of the topical breadth, one of the things I really value about CBE is that our work has always been focused on creating buildings that are good for both the planet and people. So we really bridge in everything we do, the energy questions, the indoor environmental quality questions, which are the physical environment, and then people's response, comfort, health, and well-being. And by doing research and teaching students to think about how energy and indoor environment and people's response go hand in hand, I think that's essential to creating transformational change in the building industry. And then I also think it's important. We have students who want to stay in academia. We have students who want to go into practice. Whatever path they take, one of the things that I think is really unique about CBE is that we are a very unusual model of collaboration between academia and industry, which has many benefits for both.
So how is it funded? How does it sort of exist?
So the way it started was funding through the National Science Foundation. They had this model for industry university collaborative research centers, and they gave you some startup money to pay for admin, and then you had to get 10 partners in order to be established as one of these IUCRCs. And there were about 80 around the country, but only 2 of them dealt with buildings, one at Carnegie Mellon and one at UC Berkeley. And then after we continued to grow, I think after 5 years, they sunsetted their financial support, and then we are supported by industry partners. So it's a way for them to leverage relatively small membership fees compared to the larger support of the organization. So we maybe get about 1/3 of our support from our industry partners and maybe about 2/3 from traditional grants, but our industry partners get to learn from and benefit from that whole wealth of research.
Right. Yeah, sort of symbiosis there, right? I like that.
And so like when you guys do research work, those partners, and there's like 50 partners right now, 40, 50.
Yeah, we have nearly 50 partners, and by design, they represent a very diverse set of stakeholders in the building industry. So we've got engineers, architects, contractors, manufacturers, utilities, large building owners, government organizations. So by design, we really wanted a very diverse set of industry members. And I think that's really important because they're communicating with and learning from each other.
Yeah, and my experience as an outsider is that not all of that research work is held close to your chest. Like it does filter out into society for general public, general industry, but the nuts and bolts of it really is accessible by your partners.
Well, I would say that none of it is held close to our chest.
Oh, right.
And
Okay.
that's one of the reasons I love working in academia, maybe compared to industry-based research, is that we share everything. All of the tools we develop are open source, online, free. Our research is all published. The contracts our industry partners have to sign is the university is very strict about, we own the data, we own the right to publish. Nobody can tell us what we can and can't publish. When we do field studies, for example, we often start with the assumption that the building name might be anonymous, but in some cases we publish that. So that's the only way that they can really influence what we publish, that if we're using one of their buildings for our field studies, for example, they can ask that the name not be released. And that's kind of our standard practice anyway. So everything is done to get out there into the public domain. Now, the benefit, though, of partners is that they get to shape the direction of research, which is different. They get early access to what we're learning and give us feedback. So they're helping shape the research portfolio, help us define what questions we should be asking that are really going to help them with whatever their challenges are. And then along the way to say, oh, well, have you ever thought of this? Make sure you measure that. Make sure you ask this. Did you ever consider these challenges? So they're helping to shape the research along the way to make sure it's meaningful. And then by hearing about progress reports long before the work is finally published, it really accelerates the rate of information exchange. So it reduces the time that new research findings and technology can be put into practice.
So there's like a holy trinity of like university system, of which you're part, the CBE, and then the Lawrence Berkeley Labs. So that's like this sort of like knowledge gathering, dissemination, analysis sort of trifecta in a way. I feel like it should come out of that.
Yeah, and that's sort of where I was going with in terms of holding it close to your chest, was in terms of they do have an ability to provide direction for that and early access to the data. But going back to your statement about sharing that information, unlike a lot of other academic papers which are behind paywalls, your stuff is all there for people to use. And I'm racking my brain of the university professor in I think it's Waterloo, and I can't remember her name right now, but I was in one of her seminars, and she said about academic research behind paywalls, and she said, "We're trying to save the damn planet. Share your effing information."
Yeah, pretty much.
Right.
I'll totally go against that, right?
Yeah, and I just remember hearing that and go, yeah, like, I mean, why does everybody try to hide their stuff or make? And it's not that they're trying to hide it, but there's a profit associated with the publication, and we're going, hang on, what is this all about? If this is all about money, then we've lost sight of why we're doing the research work in the first place.
Actually, let's just have a little talk about like research and problem solving. So one of the things, again, I'm getting old now, so just take it as read. I'm a grumpy old man. Right? There are some big problems out there, and there are some advances needed in the built environment. Why are we not open sourcing this problem like crazy and getting everyone? We have the internet now, which we didn't have like 20, 30 years ago, right? So a lot of these problems could be open sourced, and how many brains could jump on that and maybe do something? Why does that not happen?
I completely agree. I mean, we take several approaches in that regard. One is we develop a lot of tools so that there are an easy way for the design industry to get access to our research and to help them inform decisions. And all of our tools are free, they're online, they're open source. So that's one way we do it. And then our publications, there's a university system called eScholarship that we put all of our publications on there so they can be free. Depending on the rules of the journal, sometimes we put a preprint on there. So that's one of the ways we get around, oh, you're not allowed to put for free what we charge people for, but they do allow us to do a preprint. So maybe it's not as pretty. There's other ways that when you publish, you can pay for it to be open source. So they decide, okay, either the author's going to pay big bucks for it to be open source, or we're going to make every user pay. So we will always err on the side of will pay because we want it to be open source. And the university sometimes provides funds for that as well, because they also support this goal of everything being freely available.
Hang on, so we're paying for it to be free. Pay to be free. That doesn't sound like a good
No, it's really changed a lot in my time, and I don't like it. But what you have to do is adapt. You either change the rules when you can, or you find some workarounds.
I think there's a real role here for universities, particularly prominent ones like Berkeley, where to put a challenge out, like, we really need to get some deep work done on this problem X, and then do a call to action, right? Because you're influential, right? As an institution, and you as a professor there. I don't know. Maybe it's because it's like not invented here syndrome, right? If Berkeley solves a problem, then it's kudos to Berkeley, right? But if you open source that and everyone solves it, I guess not so much. But I don't know. I just feel we should be doing more of that in the age where we're interconnected. Why are we not doing that? It blows my mind.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Anyway, that's my rant. That's my TED talk. So.
Hey, so tell us about the book, because like 450 pages or something like that.
It got a little out of hand, but we just got a little too excited about the material. We are thrilled, and I should start with a big shout out to Mark Decay, my co-author. We come from very different backgrounds with a shared passion. So he comes from architecture and he's written books before. I come from engineering. I had never written a book. I had 100 academic journal articles, but we we both found that even though our professional careers were aimed at reducing energy use and promoting climate responsive design, things weren't moving fast enough. And we kept coming back to the experience of people in these buildings is really affects what everybody on a day-to-day basis. And we found that that's what really inspired our students. So we said, well, let's shift and stop talking about BTUs and let's start from forefronting people's experience. And sometimes I call it trickery and deception because we're still trying to save the planet and reduce energy and carbon emissions, but we're doing it by talking about people.
Yeah.
So, which I think it resonates more with common sense experiences. So the book is essentially about how to design these rich multisensory experiences in buildings. It's about how do we support people's health and well-being, and how do we bridge perspectives from the more data-driven language of building science and health sciences with a more poetic, sensorial perspective of architects, and take this knowledge and translate it into what we hope are inspirational architectural design strategies, and really using experiential richness as this hook for getting people to pay attention to how do we create spaces that both affect health and well-being in positive ways, but also connect us to climate and nature and affect other attributes of building performance like energy and carbon. But those have not exactly been the motivators by themselves that we hoped it would be.
Yeah. You had Bill Browning write a segment in the forward, and we've had Bill on the podcast before. For those that are listening, he is the guru of biophilic design, or certainly one of them. He has certainly brought it forefront and center into our vocabulary and design. And you see that through the book, The Applied Principles of Biophilic Design.
Yes.
And it's incredibly important. And, you know, Gail, one of the concluding remarks I make in my lectures is that people don't come with energy meters. They come with a sensory system, and they see architectural design through their sensory systems, not through the BTU or the kilowatt. That's not how they judge the building. Yeah. And that actually led to our own sort of trademark, which was designed for people, good buildings follow. And my own path, which was not by design either, I had a period in my life where I was able to do a study on human physiology and psychology as related to the built environment. And at the same time that I was doing that, I was starting up my engineering practice. And when we were doing engineering work according to codes and standards, we still had people complaining. And it wasn't until I connected the physiology part, which I got from David Shetzley in his work at Arizona State University and one of his students about biophilic design, that when we started to apply those principles, in a very, very short period of time, the complaints and the type of complaints that we had in buildings almost disappeared. And it was amazing.
Well, what you're talking about, I mean, what I heard when you were describing your book, Gail, was you're bringing the artist, the architect, with the engineer in service of the outcome of the occupant, right?
Exactly.
You know, and that gets forgotten, doesn't it? In every sort of project, everyone gets under pressure, everyone sort of retreats into their basic silo. And it does get forgotten. It's an outcome-based business we're in, right? But because it's been segmented down, people forget that. You know, I love Robertson, you know, design for people, you know. I love IEQ, KPIs when we're doing design. You know, then it gets you thinking. But then you have to move away from one of my theories on why things suck so much, is because the supply chain designs buildings. So I'd been in these meetings, right? Oh, we're going to do the greenest building ever. And my first question is, oh, really? Yeah. So what's your budget? Okay, right. So, most budgets are designed for rooftop air conditioning units. You know why? Because they can be produced cheaply, because the supply chain can do it cheaply. When you say we're doing radiant, we're doing, this or that, the other, and it's not delivered at scale by the supply chain, then your budget goes up. And this is the problem. All problems, in my opinion, are the owner's problems, right? Most building owners expect a Porsche, but they want to pay the small Ford price. And someone has to say to them, no, you can't do that, right? But anyway, again, that's my rant.
Well, and then the irony is all of those decisions are going to affect the experience of people in those buildings.
Yeah.
And you can have positive or negative effects, but you're more likely to have positive effects if you think about it, right? So you're going to impact experience whether or not you think about it. But if you do think about it and think about it early, it's what we call experiential programming. Think in the very beginning about what are your intentions about the role of the inhabitant in terms of how they interact with the building, how they're going to experience the building. And if you start with that, it changes conversations. And Robert, I loved your article, what was it called? In a Town Called Comfort, Only the Blind Can See, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about the same thing here. It's about how do spaces make you feel? And what if you were blind and you stopped talking about the physical dimensions of a building, but really thought about forefronting people? And that's where we start with the book. We start with principles of how do you enhance the positive rather than reduce the negative? So many of our standards and our research are all about minimizing complaints, and they don't even do that well. Well, what if we just change our thinking from making things less bad to more better? And I don't think that's grammatically correct, but I think it gets the point across. It's about enhancing positive. Similarly, a lot of building standards, because of that thinking, it's all about reducing complaints. And the way you reduce complaints is you set a goal of neutrality. You set a goal of what I call sensory deprivation. What if nobody notices? And if nobody notices and complains, that's a success. Well, what if instead we set a goal that people do notice, but they notice in positive ways? And instead of neutrality, we're trying to get people to feel these vital environments and that they thrive and that they think about it and they notice, but that it's all positive. And instead of goals of everything should be the same all the time, everywhere, static, uniform environments, I call that thermal monotony, right? What if we have instead thermal delight, where you have mild variability? You follow the principles of alesthesia, which are the physiological basis for thermal delight. What if instead of handing off the controls to some big machines, we complement those with some personal comfort systems and autonomy, and we think about conditioning people rather than space? Do you all care what the temperature of the corner of the room is? No, we're trying to keep our bodies comfortable. What if the chair I'm sitting in has heating and cooling in the seat and the back? That's something CBE is developing. I don't really care what the room is like, and maybe my neighbor wants something completely different than me. It's about keeping people comfortable. So the same way we've had, the ideas of task ambient lighting are in all office buildings, right? Keep the ambient lights low and then give everybody a task light on their desk that they can use when and where they want it. Are you doing paper-based work? Or are you looking at a computer screen, right? What if thermal conditioning followed the same principles of this task ambient split, and you let the broader environment and circulation spaces vary over a wider range? You save a lot of energy, and then you supplement that with personal comfort systems so that I can have heating or cooling when and where I want it, and it satisfies my own preferences rather than imagining that we all feel alike and giving everybody the same conditions all the time. So there's my rant.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you struggling with paperwork, spreadsheet overload, and project management? Then Blue Rhythm is the solution to help you. Streamline your commissioning and project management process. Go paperless, increase efficiency, and save money. Blue Rhythm is commissioning and project management software by practitioners for practitioners, adapting to your workflows and processes, and doing things your way. Blue Rhythm provides painless and fast onboarding by bringing your existing workflows, forms, checklists, and issues logs into Blue Rhythm for you. You can use their pre-built templates to customize your commissioning workflows. And Blue Rhythm can fully handle the transition from your current software platform. Blue Rhythm is secure, scalable, and reliable, backed by amazing support, and accessible 24/7 on any Windows, iOS, or Android device. Why are you still using paper and hard-to-control spreadsheets? Start your free Blue Rhythm account today at bluerhythm.com.
And now, back to the show.
Because what you're talking about here is making the user experience prime, right, as a design consideration.
Yeah, it starts with the person.
Always.
And
I'm teaching a new class this semester called Sensory Space. And it's built partially, but not entirely on the book. Bill Browning came and gave a lecture as well. And the students are just eating it up. They love it. It's really starting with these principles of start with the person. How do we experience space? Start with experiential programming. What are our intentions? Sensory mapping. There's very little visual representation of how people feel in a space beyond the visual. So these incredibly creative students have been playing around with different ways to represent thermal and acoustic and olfactory experience. We've been talking with Kay Sargent at HOK about neurodiversity and shared spaces such as the workplace where we all want something different. And how do you create low and high intensity places and give people choice and agency to move around and adapt because we all have different needs. And the students are just loving it. And I get inspired by their inspiration.
This reminds me of the Academy for Neuroscience and Architecture. Was it ANFA? Academy for
ANFA, the Academy for Neuroscience for Architecture. They're actually doing a student competition right now at the SOC Center with linking neuroscience and architecture. And I've got 2 teams of students in my class who are going to be submitting for that and using the class and the assignments to kind of help prep them. So stay tuned. I think they're going to be strong contenders.
That's awesome. I love that. My whole introduction to that strand in design actually started with a book by Dr. Esther Sternberg, Healing Faith.
Esther Sternberg, Healing Environments. Oh, yeah, she's a powerhouse.
Yeah.
She's wonderful. Her work is fabulous.
Yeah, and it was one of those things, where I was reading, Dr. Shetzley's work and then her work, and then I saw the movie about Ray Charles, and that's where that in a town called Comfort, only the blind can see came from. Because I was looking at Ray and I'm going, well, when Ray buys a house, like what does he use to judge the architecture? Because he doesn't have vision. So it's that'll happen at the same time. And really just and as soon as I had sort of put in those pieces together, I just said, okay, this is the missing gap between property development, architecture, engineering, and then the occupants is where you haven't connected those dots. And then your work and other people's work came out. And so out of that, you have all of this experience, all of this knowledge, you're working with amazing people all over the world, you publish a book, and you have that lens, and then you look at the world of property development, and there's like this, it's like it's constipated. It's like, why can't we get this stuff through into the real world? We see it in some buildings. There's a lot of good buildings out now that have happened in the last 10, 15 years. But by and large, you can just drive down any city in any part of the world. And both Adam and I travel a lot. It doesn't matter whether you're in Jakarta or Dubai or Anchorage, Alaska. There are good buildings and bad buildings. And you can, just by looking at them, you can tell. So why do we still have bad buildings?
Oh my God. I wish I knew that. I tell you, so this is my 40th year teaching as a faculty member at UC Berkeley. So I've been doing at this a while. I know what you're thinking. Must have started when I was 10 years old. Thank you very much. I know. But all right. So from the very beginning, even as a student, I was caring about energy efficiency. And then that moved to, well, we need to reduce energy use because we need to mitigate climate change. And now we're talking about adapting to climate change because we basically failed. And there are some days that I get so frustrated because if so many smart, dedicated, value-driven people have been working on this for so long, and we still have these crappy buildings that are, making environments horrible for people or using too much energy. And now we didn't mitigate climate change. We're still at it, but now we have to talk about adapting to it because it's here. It drives me crazy. And here's what I thought about in 2020. Remember that year? COVID pandemic hit, and the global change in people's behavior was so radically fast. I've never seen anything like it. People acted quickly on a scale that was tremendous because people were dying. So what would it take for people to see the climate crisis in the same way they recognize the COVID health crisis and act quickly? Because that's what we need. But because it's a slow death to the planet and people, and because we don't see our loved ones dropping, people don't react quickly. So if we could somehow have people see it as the crisis that COVID was, maybe we can get people to change their behavior.
I know the answer to this. Miss, go ahead. I told you I respect teachers. So I agree. The climate crisis or climate change has a big problem. And the problem is Don Draper was not involved in naming it. When you call it climate this, it gives people the permission to check out, because most people go, that's beyond my control. It's a God thing. If you're that way inclined, I can't do anything about it. So everyone just checks out. The way you affect the change you and I want is you put it in people's face. You call it environmental pollution and degradation. And every night on TV, I would just have videos at the end of the news and going, here's our 30-second segment on the river that's being polluted today. There'd just be an image of like stuff going in rivers, right? And so that's one way. You got to make people aware of it. You got to rename it. 2, you've got to remove the subsidies from everything. The real price has to be paid. So what do I mean by that?
Wait.
If you are a train company, you have to build tracks. If you're Ford or GM, someone builds those tracks for you. They're called roads. So you're subsidized there. And then you're subsidized in 100,000 different ways, right? We cannot do without fossil fuels. It's in everything. It's in the toothpaste I swallowed this morning, right? But you need it. But what you don't need is someone paying my taxes being used to subsidize things. The real cost needs to be applied, not overnight. It can be done gently. And then the real name needs to be applied. And whenever I hear the word climate crisis, it just makes me want to cry, because Don Draper would never have let that happen.
That's interesting. We need better marketers.
You do. We do. We're horrible.
The science we have down. But you're right, Adam. I mean, when we were in Indonesia and we spent 3 weeks traveling a good part of the country, I'll give you two examples. When we were snorkeling in one part of Indonesia, that part of the country still has a kingdom, and they are very much in tune with Mother Nature, and they have very strict laws about pollution and in the ocean, what you can do and what you can't do off of their particular responsibility. And the reef there is amazing. It's way more healthier than anything I've seen around the world diving, and I've dived in a lot of places and snorkeled in a lot of places. But it's because they have very strict laws. Like, you can't harvest fish from this area. You can't, if you get caught polluting, that's it. You're done. You're going to jail. But in the same, you can drive, 8 or 9 hours or 10 hours, and there'll be absolutely pollution everywhere, plastic bottles everywhere. And I was asking our interpreter, and I said, like, this can't, like, we're on a back trip into one of the villages, and I'm saying, like, this can't be the villagers that are leaving this garbage behind. He says, no, it's the tourists. And I'm thinking to myself, when this is for the people, this is for the Pepsis of the world and the Coca-Colas of the world. Anybody that's, and this is going to your point, Adam, anybody that's producing plastic, you need to pay to clean up that mess, or you need to teach your clients, your customers, your users, the consequences of not handling that bottling the way it should be handled.
And here's how you do it.
These have no, some are really good at handling recycling. There's many, many parts of the world that we experienced in our 3 months in those developing and poor nations. They don't have it.
Look.
And you can be swimming in one part of the world, snorkeling, scuba diving, and you'll come up to the surface and there'll be bottles after bottles and plastic wrappers floating by. And it's this huge, like, slap to the side of the head that you dive underwater and you see all of this beauty, and then you come to the surface and you see the garbage. Or you come to another part of the world and you dive or you snorkel and you see all the beauty below, and then you come up and you see the same beauty, and it's just like, and the difference is in the hands of the manufacturers.
But the solution lays with Gail. Roll with me here. The most powerful force in the world is consumer disobedience.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. 2
examples. Gandhi. Right? Non-violence brought down the biggest empire the world's ever seen. My boys, you're welcome. Right? 2, how many of you have a BlackBerry right now? When I moved to Canada, everyone had a BlackBerry. The US government gave them out to everybody, right? Within the space of a year, that went from like hero to zero.
Yeah.
That wasn't because Steve Jobs brought a good alternative in. Consumers went, you know what? I think we're done with that. And there was nothing BlackBerry could do. Right? You cannot legislate against consumer disobedience. This is why, getting back to you, and the importance of teaching institutions is, you don't need to indoctrinate people, but you need to get them to make better choices, right? If all the cohorts who graduate out of Berkeley and other places like that just stop buying plastic shit, you know what happens?
Yeah.
There's no plastic. My generation's dying off. Oh, we're going away, right? It's important that the people going through, revolution's no good. All that ends up is with money and death. It's evolution, and it's the consumer disobedience that goes with that makes the change. And that's another TED Talk. You're welcome.
That's very powerful. I'm putting my money on the youth. I tell you, it's interesting that my world professionally is focused on this demographic that's mostly in their 20s, some young 30s, but I get older, but the people I work with don't. As my colleagues do, but my students, I've been seeing this fixed slice. Now, granted, they're UC Berkeley students, but I see such strong values and hope among the youth that they are my hope for the future. I really do believe that they are going to be the change agents. It's part of why I love teaching. They keep me young. They keep me hopeful. I just find that they are incredibly creative and motivated, and I just hope that I don't mess them up, that they just that they don't that I don't make them. I just try not to ruin them. They already come to me with smarts and creativity and strong values and hope and aspirations and vision, and they blow me away. So I am a great believer in the young people of this world, and it's what keeps me going.
This is why teaching matters, right? You're influencing on scale how many minds year after year, right? That actually matters. It drives me bonkers that society doesn't value that. Anyway, let's not get onto that. Again, angry old man, right?
But it's why I love it. It's just it's not about me. I'm just this drop that's going to create these larger ripples, and I love it. One of my favorite things to do is when I go to conferences and students from years ago come up to me and tell me what they're doing in life. And they may have done that whether or not they passed through my class, but I'll take it. They talk about how my classes were inspirational for them. They would have been doing brilliant things otherwise. But it's what I love about my world is watching them grow and go out and make a difference in their own way. And it's very gratifying.
Everybody remembers that they have good teachers. Everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why teachers matter. So anyway, yeah, go.
Which means we can remember one or two.
Yeah, and it's always just one or two, right? How many teachers touch you? There's always one or two that you remember because those are the values you associate with and you carry forward, hopefully, right? Hopefully they're good teachers and it's good stuff. But look, we're coming up on an hour. We try to keep things to an hour, but we do wrap up slowly. So it's not like, and we do finish with 2 questions. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to say? One of the things I wanted to ask you was, you've been doing this a long time. You affect a lot of young people. You're in part of the world where research and development, you've been involved in research and development of built environment. What do you see coming? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? But what do you see coming down the pipe in the next 25 years?
I am always optimistic because I have to be. And what I see is probably coming from that optimism. So and it's linked, what I see is linked to what I hope for. So I think this idea of having stronger bridges, breaking down silos between disciplines, but breaking down silos between research and practice. So I would like to see research translated to practice either through tools or through emphasizing people. So we have less rigorous control, more personal autonomy. We're able to vary that, embracing more variable environments because it matters for people. So we're designing for greater diversity of sensory experiences, greater connection to climate and nature, because I firmly believe that those are ways to both save energy and enhance comfort. I think socially we're seeing that conversations about equity and inclusivity, I think, is permeating into the building world and thinking about how do we affect all buildings for all people, everyday spaces, not just the elite award-winning buildings. So we need to be able to think about how are we having an impact both on experience and energy across the board? How do we engage more people in the field? So those are some of the things that I'm excited about seeing.
Good. It's good that you can be positive after 40 years of teaching, right? So
no, it's what is that phrase? Was it Ray Bradbury who said, "Love what you do and do what you love"?
Yeah.
So I feel like I have the best job in the world because that's what I do. Every day is a new adventure. I'm always learning. It's very intellectually stimulating and humbling at the same time. When you're at Berkeley, I say that when you live in a world of giants, it's easy to feel small. So that's something I love about the people I work with, but it's also very humbling because I get to see amazing people both within my community and pass through. And it's both exciting and humbling all at the same time.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's pretend you and Amory Lovins are going to rewrite his essay from 40 years ago. Where he basically said we're at a place in time, we have two choices, right? If we take this path 40, 50 years from now, we'll see we won't have to worry about the greenhouse gas emissions. There'll be renewables. We'll be living in a world where second law thermodynamics rules, not just first law, but second law. Or we'll be where we are today, right? Combustion everywhere, all over the planet, generating power, right? And not being used, right? Yeah, exactly. So you and Amory are going to rewrite Amory's essay from 40 years ago, and you have to present it to the federal government in your country. What does that essay say now, 40 years later? Whoops, we screwed up.
Yeah, that's a big one. Wow. Well, in a short amount of time, I think that too often we focus on the what we need to do and the technology. And I think we lose sight of the why. And so I think the why can either be small scale people and how do we inspire and mentor young people? It can be big scale in terms of policy and standards and how do we guide people? But I think we've been too focused on the what and the technology, and we actually know how to stop screwing up. But that didn't get us to where we need to be. So, how do we do a better job of inspiring young people? Because this is for the long term. And, when I think about that, I realize, young people are attracted to either our path or other paths for a variety of different reasons. And I think you need to know your audience. If we just try to inspire and convince people from where we're coming from, you're only going to be talking to kindred spirits and you're going to lose others. So from what I see in my world, there are some people who are very value driven. So you could inspire them to work in our industry by talking about, if you work on buildings, there's this enormous impact for saving the environment and day-to-day well-being of people and all this positive stuff you can do. So, I love talking about that because that's where I come from, but not everybody listens to that. So you need to also think, well, I say that we focus too much on the technology, but maybe that's what gets people excited. And especially with AI and machine learning. And so you got to know your audience and maybe you get them excited to make change because of the technical aspects of the business. As an engineer teaching in architecture, some of the people in my world, they just get excited about design and creativity. So you have to talk about it from that point of view. And the design oriented aspects of saving the planet and people and what are they? I think everybody likes to learn. Everybody likes to be intellectually challenged, but in different ways. So you need to talk about what are those challenges and how can you make a difference, and whether they're looking at a professional or research track. It was a different take on your question about writing an essay, but I would write the essay by starting about how do we inspire young people and what can we do differently than in the last 40 years where I'm where I want to be in terms of I still love my career. I don't think the world is where I was hoping it would be in terms of these challenges.
Actually,
Yeah, I totally agree. When you said the word, explaining to people the why as opposed to the how and what, and you're right, we know how to do it and we know what it takes. In many ways, Adam, it ties back into your comment about industry dictates what gets done. A big part of that is our building codes. Our building codes don't explain why you need to do things. You get judged on the how all the time. How did you put this together? What materials did you use? But not why you need to do these things. And so we have an industry, going back to Adam, to your comment, the system is a jail, really, for the things that we need to break out of jail. We really need to. It's, we're working within this boundary condition, which is established by industry, and industry does this, and industry will only do this unless we use some government directive called building codes to change. And and it goes back again, Adam, to your comment about the role that society plays and people plays. That won't happen until people get fed up. And like you were saying too earlier, Gail, is that people need to are fed up. I mean, you can see it in the way people interact with their buildings and in the post-occupancy evaluations. They're fed up.
Industry is
fed up at their homes.
Right? Industry is reactive. So if people demand something, they will deliver, right? But it will always be reactive, but it's reactive in such a massive way that it's hard to change, right? That's why consumer disobedience only works at scale. It never works in small scale, right?
Right.
So sounds like a class for Berkeley, consumer disobedience.
That would definitely attract UC Berkeley students.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would I get smoke bombed though and thrown out?
No, come on over, Adam. We'll do it together.
There you go.
But
I'll turn you guys on.
To the point on the book, the way I would open that book we were just talking about is I'd ask two questions. And the first one to trap, do you think mum and dad and our generation did a good job of the built environment so far? And they would all go, no, you all suck. And the next question is, how would you change it, right? And that's the book. But
there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to wrap up.
I'm gonna tilt my screen. You probably recognize this book. Let me see if I can do this. Hang on a second. Oblique,
I think, to get there.
I'm going to have to get my glasses on there. Oh, yes. I know that book.
Right. So this is Ching's, I think this is going back to the 80s, this book. It's the most, so Gail, over my career, I've given away 3 libraries. And what's left in my library is a handful of books that were written in the 1800s. And a few, because they're all fundamental based, right? It's one thing people back in the 1800s, people were discovering shit, right? And that stuff has stayed true. And then books like this, and I'm trying to remember, 1975, this was published. And so when I was reading your book, because the graphics in this book are first principle stuff, like it's just like what was looked at back then by Ching and then still applies today. And then I was looking through your book and I'm looking at the images, and it's like I'm looking at a tabletop architectural digest of great architecture from around the world. And I got an image of the awesome architecture, and the pictorials, the photographs are amazing. And Ching's work in illustrating architecture, and you get those and you put, that's what your book is. It puts those two together. So for anybody that's listening to this program, if you're familiar with those publications, and if you want something that marries the two together in a wonderful format, that's your guys' book. And so thanks for publishing that.
Yeah, we'll be putting in the bio, in the notes for that book. So just to wrap up, I've got one question which I stole from another podcast I listened to, but it always gets good answers. And it's this: just in the built environment in general, what's the big topic we should be talking about that we're not really talking about right now?
That we're not talking about?
It's the big thing that's going unsaid.
Well, I don't know if it's being unsaid. It's just not being paid attention to. So if I get back to, we need to think about both buildings that are good for the planet and people. For the planet, there's been a shift towards conversations where instead of the broad buzzword of sustainability, we're zeroing in on decarbonization, which is critically important. So that's a conversation it's being said. It just needs to be paid more attention to. That's the planet side. And then the people side, I just hope everybody keeps talking about sensory experience, because that's what I'm excited about in terms of affecting people's health and well-being.
Sensory experience. I like that. Okay. Well, we're wrapping up now. So I just want to say best of luck with your book. Thank you for writing it. And thank you very much for coming on the show.
Yeah, Gail.
It's really been enjoyable for me. And it's not often I get to try and influence a top professor at Berkeley. That doesn't happen to me every day of the week. So,
Well, you guys are fun to talk to, and hopefully the next time it will be at that bar, and we'll continue the conversation.
Sounds like a plan.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you passionate about the built environment? Do you want to learn from the industry's most inspiring, intelligent, and accomplished professionals? Then the companion to this podcast, Wisdom of the Property Crowd, is just the book for you. From Edifice Complex podcast interviews, this book distills the critical thinking, insight, and ideas of some of the property industry's most accomplished and respected practitioners. Each chapter is a synopsis of an hour-plus interview, capturing the takeaways and insights, including diagrams and images, to help explain concepts and ideas. There's also a brief bio about the interviewee and a QR code linked to the podcast episode for those that want to explore further. These are the mentors you wish you had in college. Wisdom of the Property Crowd by Adam Muggleton. Available on Amazon worldwide.
And now, back to the show.
Adam, another awesome interview. I love the fact that Gail has had this career that spanned many, many decades, and she made a comment, which is hilarious, about, she keeps getting older, but her students are staying the same age. For some reason, that resonated with me. I just thought it's so true that, as when you teach and you pass on knowledge, which she does as, that's part of her profession. For you and I, it's sort of a part-time gig, but it is one of the most rewarding things is to teach. And I always cherish the moments when students from the past come up and say, hey, I was in your class and this is what I got out of it and this is what I'm doing. And it's just, it's one of the most awe-inspiring experiences you ever get.
That's a long feedback loop, but probably one of the most valued, right? That, you made a difference to someone.
Yeah. In many ways, and the musicians listening to this wrap-up will understand this. It's like when you're playing and you're just jamming with somebody, and usually it happens with 2 or 3 of the musicians in the room where they just sync. There's an emotional sync that takes place. There's a artistical sync that takes place, and you're actually looking at each other, and there's nothing but joy that comes through. And in many ways, it's that feeling of joy when you're playing with other musicians.
Yep.
That joy that comes from having somebody come up after they've taken your class and going, "This is what happened to me. This is what I did with the information," and how that's just so inspiring, right? And
Joe, that's so also you get that on some project teams, right? I've worked on a few projects where everybody just syncs up, everyone gets aligned, and great shit comes out of that, right?
yeah,
But it's not the norm; it's the exception, because normally there's some asshole somewhere not on the train, right? When it happens, you remember it. I've got 3 or 4 jobs in my memory banks that were just like that. Everyone was on top of their game, really bringing it every day.
yeah.
That's the same thing. There is a frequency. I don't know what it is. It's a mind hive, but that matters, and that sort of thing begins with your education, actually, right? So you go to university, hopefully you meet people you're going to know for your career, you get inspired by a teacher, but there's a bit of a mind sync starting to happen there, right? There's a frequency tuning that's happening. You might find that you become passionate about sustainability or energy modeling or the deep calculations, but then you start hiving with other people like that. This is why university is so important and college, yet underplayed and undervalued, right? Someone like Bill Browning should just be going from university to university, talking about biophilia and getting people excited and tuned onto that. Yeah. The government should be paying him to freaking do that, quite frankly.
We were talking today about negotiation, right?
Yeah.
And one of the key words in negotiation that you try to avoid is compromise.
Yep.
Right, because that's not a win-win where collaboration is.
Yep.
So let's work together to help you as the architect or you as the engineer, you as the client to get what you want, and you help me get what I want as whatever role I'm playing, right?
Yeah.
So when negotiations turn from being compromises to collaboration, that's that frequency that you're talking about. It's the synchronization of everybody's in this to help everybody else get what they need from this project. And when you have respect for that and honor that, and give that a place to nourish it, you're right. It's phenomenal.
This is why soft skills really are important, particularly in our business, because Margaret Thatcher had a famous interview once where they were going to, why don't you compromise with blah, blah, blah? She said, so you want both of us to walk away with not what we want. But she said, I believe in the power of my idea that I can convince them and show them that it is the right way without being a bully. Right. And that's what we're talking about here, right? The idea, if it carries the day, will be convincing, but it's on you to sell it, present it well, right? This is why sometimes a lot of great ideas don't come through, because whoever it is doesn't have the skill or the information or the communication to deliver it to a point where it gets people aligned, right? And when you go back to some great project teams, the alignment came from the fact that probably everybody could communicate what was important and not important, and they could sort of like navigate through that, right? Because there's 1,000 decisions in every design meeting, right? They get made. I don't know. It's just, I think, again, it's a really underplayed thing, how important communication and being able to put your idea across without being a bloody Genghis Khan and making everybody smile now, it's my idea, you know?
They'll beat you into happiness.
Yeah, you will like this. The beatings will continue till you all start smiling.
And in many ways, like when you think about their book, there's a lot of synchronicity in that book.
Yeah.
And a lot of holistics and all of that, but all of that has to come not from compromising. Like when I was flipping through the pages, I didn't see anything about compromise.
No. It was about the strength of the idea, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully, again, lots of illustrations. The illustrations speak to that, right? So how do you communicate a great idea? You talk about it, you write about it, and you draw it.
Yeah.
And
she has an interesting career path. I mean, from her time at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs to CBE and Ed Ahrens, who we've had on the show, it's fun. It's funny how this podcast is closing the loop on a lot of circles.
There's a lot of friends of the pod there, right? There's Bill, there's Ed, now Gail, right? That's a nice trifecta, that is.
Yeah, absolutely it is. It's a testament, like, so again, for like the parents and the students that listen to the podcast, it's a testament to giving opportunity for students to make an inventory of their experiences and embracing the confusion and saying, okay, well, this will have time to blossom. But while I'm on that journey, the adjacent studies, which is one of the ethos of this podcast, is adjacent studies, and where that has taken the leaders that we've interviewed over the last 5 years. For those that are listening, we've been doing this now for 5 years. And when I just think about the inventory of people that have shared their knowledge, all of them were adjacent thinkers, integrated thought processors. Like there was nobody that wasn't a silo. And Gail is a great example of, a product of somebody who's in school. She knows what she's good at, but she still doesn't quite understand what she's going to do with that. And somebody, presents to her this opportunity, and here she is 40 years later. She's assistant director for the Center for the Built Environment.
I think what Gail was saying there was like, you bring this, if it's a Venn diagram, I'll channel my inner Kamala Harris here. The Venn diagram of engineering, architecture, and then IEQ or outcome for occupants, right? What she's advocating for is mushing that together, right? And making that the design solution and the design question, right? Yeah. Not just, I'm an engineer, here's the engineer solution. Thank you, have a nice day, here's my bill. Pretty much really jobs are done now.
And that's why engineers are known as socially inept people.
And like rhinos, they're thick-skinned and they charge a lot.
This is the book. This is how it's supposed to be done.
Why is it like that? ASHRAE told me.
Not all of them are. Of course, we've had a lot of engineers on the podcast that have great communication skills. You know, when you think about people that have they're true leaders, and part of being a leader is being able to communicate, and we've seen that. So, it was awesome having her on and her sharing her. There was a couple of questions. You'll have to get her back on again because I wanted to know, like, so they have this CBE and all of these partners, which are all, mix of everybody from engineers to architects to contractors and manufacturers. Are they tracking the projects that these people work on in terms of their outcomes? Like, do people who are partners with the CBE produce better buildings? Are the post-occupancy evaluations, right?
Love to know that. This is where the student population could be used as free labor to do some open source projects here. Collect this data, put it out, pass it on to the next students behind them to continue it, right? Massive open source database. That's, we all talk about, large language models, data pools. This is what's missing in the built environment. There's no data pool for building performance or outcomes or user experience, right? We need that.
Yeah. One of
our guests was using Airbnb reviews to mine that data pool, right?
Yeah, that was a student of Liam O'Brien from Carleton University.
It was a great hack, but surely Berkeley and whoever, I mean, Berkeley's a big name, right? Berkeley, Stanford, NYU, couldn't they come together and run that as a non-profit? I don't know. There just seems to be a lot of missed opportunities that need to be handled. So that's my challenge. I mean, teachers are really important and really undervalued. And one of the teachers' job is to challenge the people coming in to be better than we are, right? Be better than us. Absolutely. Do something different. Run this thing. So, I think teachers have two jobs really. Challenge, inspire, and also put out that thing. What are you going to do that we ain't doing?
Well, and I think anybody that's done any teaching, you'll know, there's usually one or two people in your class that is all in, totally engaged. They're challenging you on your information. They're digging into it. They're rolling up their sleeves and they're just totally on board. And recognizing those individuals and then inspiring them to, hey, your brain is different than everybody else's brain, and your passion is different than everybody else's passion. And, we need to release you into society, but we need to arm you with, so you can tell the story and demonstrate that what you're saying is right.
You know what? We should wrap it up right there. There's a big thought there. Yeah. Okay, man. I'll see you on the next one.
All right, Adam. Cheers.
Take care. Bye.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. To access show notes for this episode, visit edificecomplexpodcast.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.